Green light number one. Good morning, good afternoon, LinkedIn. Happy Tuesday. Uh, Here with Danielle Urban, building some workspaces out. How you doing, Danielle?
Pretty good, Chris. How are you?
I am fantastic. Usually we get together on Fridays. We're just having some uh kids life discussion, and school's back in session, so we got a new time. But still talking about workspaces. So looking forward to still bringing value. Um, and you brought up a good topic last week, which I love serendipity and all its various forms. And I had just talked to the guys at Kixie on Thursday. And one of the things I'm always mindful of when talking about integrations and partners. It's like, how well do they know HubSpot and all the things? And lo and behold, you mentioned on Friday that you're looking to talk about integrations. So what led to that before we jump into the conversation today?
Well, a few things. I feel like everything kind of pointed at this discussion because I had the conversation with Brian on our last show, Chris, about webhooks in custom events and how to use webhooks to push information into HubSpot in custom events. And we sort of made up a use case and played it out to see how it worked. And so that's one example where you're trying to get information from another platform into HubSpot for whatever reason you might need it there. But then I also had a conversation around the same time that you did with Kixie to evaluate their integration and their partner program and all that they were talking about ahead of inbound. And had a great conversation with them and one of their sales engineers. But it was sort of a funny conversation where I was guiding them through the things that I want to do in HubSpot while they were on the call. And obviously they know their platform inside and out. But as I got into more and more technical questions, like, oh, how is this posting? Is it posting through the, engagements API so that it's appearing as text messaging? Can you do one-on-one and can you analyze these messages and aggregate because they're posting the same as something else? They were kind of like, we're going to get back to you. So, which is a totally fair and valid answer. I was really pushing them when they were showing up, to pitch me about being a partner. And I'm like, here are a lot of technical questions that you don't have resources to answer in this very second. But it again led me to like, okay, when you are trying to figure out how to get things integrated with HubSpot, what do you actually need to look for? Because if you're not like me and get really in the weeds on things and start asking about which API they're posting to, how are you supposed to know if this integration is going to do what you want it to do? And how do you set up that integration? What is the best way to set up an integration? And what are the limitations of some of the ways that you could pull things together? Um, so that's our discussion for today.
Yeah, and I think I might have been answering some of those questions, like possibly at the same time while
Yeah.
talking to David and Aldo. And that's
Rooms.
like for me, that speaks to the nuance and the challenge of the HubSpot ecosystem right now. HubSpot moves so fast that even people from the same company can have vastly different knowledge sets about what the platform can do and how they relate to it and their expertise. So I think like number one, like nobody should be afraid to question or like confirm like, okay, I know it works like this. Do you know it works like this? Right? Just constantly, I'm doing that every day. And what came to mind, so in the context of workspaces, right? We're always talking about creating this singular place to do our jobs, and usually that means bringing data in. And as we move from point solution to customer platform, the point solution conversation when HubSpot's just the marketing platform, it's like, okay, we're just going to share data just so you can see it, right? You're not going to do, you can't even do anything with it. We're just going to put it in the record view. And I experienced this for the first time when integrating a CPQ. And it was there. I get excited for these like newbie moments because I feel like I can help them do better with their tool or their integration. And that was their second HubSpot integration. But it wasn't until like, and this is where even the scope says, like, bring the data into HubSpot. Like, how many different ways can we define that? Like,
Yeah.
so what ended up happening is just a card on the side, in the right sidebar. It's like, okay, here's 5 fields. And then I'm like, I don't see it. I can't pull up in reports. Like, what am I supposed to do with that? Right?
Yeah, it's funny because I've seen so many different integrations and different things that people call integrations that I might not have the same term to describe. Um,
Oh man, it's the worst when somebody starts talking about HubSpot being integrated with other spots of HubSpot.
we have such a range of things that we need to talk about with that. But I think one other piece that sort of pointed me to this is we're coming up on inbound. And last year at inbound, there was a lot of buzz and excitement around the ability to code React components into the center column of records, which is still super cool. But I think the limitation that I keep running into with that, personally, I haven't built any. I've done a lot of record customization, as we saw in one of our first episodes together. But and so correct me if I'm misspeaking here, but I think that when you code something like that and you build another platform with functionality in HubSpot, it's still not actually integrated, to your point, where you can access those properties. Like, you can do things in HubSpot in that other system, which could be called an integration, but really it's almost like an iframe where you're creating an experience in another platform that happens to be accessible through HubSpot, which has a multitude of benefits, but still from the like HubSpot operational perspective, you can't do anything with that information. So what Brian and I talked about just over a week ago now was, you might have that, but you still need to get information back into HubSpot. And when you have to figure out how that information comes back together to create a single source of truth, which I would argue is a complete lie, but when you're working towards that goal, then you still have to figure out how all those pieces come together. And so on the continuum of integrations, you've got that as sort of the left side, where at an absolute baseline, you can see into the other platform. And then a step in from that is you can do something in that other platform from HubSpot. And even Typeform is a good example of that now. You have the Typeform experience in HubSpot, which I've seen just pop up in accounts. And you have the create a form button, and then next to it, you have a Typeform button. When you click on that Typeform button, it pops up a window and prompts you to log into Typeform. Granted, they have a pretty decent feedback loop where it's pushing a Typeform back into the HubSpot form, but that's a good example on the front end of where you are accessing another platform from within HubSpot, but I wouldn't even call that experience an integration. They've taken the next step separately, and that existed first before that front end piece existed, where that front end piece is really just a product experience within HubSpot. It's not an integration.
Yeah. And that's where I probably take it too far sometimes with like bringing it back to this philosophical issue of what is HubSpot, and like single point solution or platform, and like whether or not we're manipulating data. The way I like to think about it is got customer facing teams that need to use HubSpot to do their job. And what does customer platform mean? In theory, the place where the customer process starts and ends. That means we at least see all the data and all the things, all the engagements, but we don't necessarily need HubSpot generating it or even to be modifying it in HubSpot. Like inventory levels come to mind, a lot of manufacturing stuff that's generally going to be done in the ERP. But even there, it's like as soon as you inch closer to this better UX, this better experience, and it's sitting right next to other pieces of data that we know are reportable and we can use in workflows and we can do all these things, that's where like just bringing it over, I'm curious how many actual use cases there are where literally you only need to see the data and that's enough, right? Because so often, and I think a part of the excitement last year, I remember the use case of like secure data, right? It's okay, HubSpot's not HIPAA compliant, but you can still like see it, but you can't manipulate it. And there's situations like that. But now, even as we move forward and we can manage credit card information and a lot of things like that, like I'd be curious to see how many, like, if there's a real need to only, you know, just see data, like as a part of my job, if I'm serving the customer, like throughout the journey, right? Because generally, like, how does it, if it's relevant, like, we're reporting on it somewhere,
Right.
right? Probably.
I think that's an interesting example too, because when you think about the different roles that are using HubSpot as a workspace, to bring it back, then who is the person in your organization that's going to sit there and really focus on one contact record at a time. And that I feel like is just maybe a CSM, but even they are trying to optimize their workday, potentially to meet sales goals or meet some KPIs for their team for engagement. And so then beyond that, it might just be support where they're coming in and assessing things as needed. And they might need to see something, but not necessarily have to take action on it as much as they might. And that's where permission roles come into play. But everybody else who's using HubSpot is trying to look at things in aggregate and analyze things in aggregate. So if that information isn't available to slice and dice, if that data is not actually available to you in a report, it makes it really difficult. Like you can't even justify the dev work that would go into creating that integration. I know I've had with a couple clients, I work with a lot of SaaS companies. We want to push through things like last login date and try to get some of that usage information in HubSpot. If you're on a pro level subscription in HubSpot, you have to map it all to properties unless you get Ops Hub Pro so that you unlock custom events. But otherwise, you have to map out which like 4 or 5 properties so that you're not totally overloading it. You want to push through and then have your product development team push over those properties. So if it's last login, they're running that on the login screen and they're coding that event to push a property over to HubSpot. And they might even need some kind of middleware. And it requires a lot of dev resources. And then at the end of the day, that single data point of the last login date is incredibly valuable for marketing, for customer service, for everybody, or customer success, because you can segment off of that. It's like last login date is more than 2 weeks ago, send them marketing. But when you start to unlock that and your marketing team gets a taste for how much value is in that kind of data, you really want to go nuts with it. And I will say, I haven't explored this yet, but there's the new Pendo bidirectional sync that I think is fully live. I was just scrolling product updates this morning and noticed that. And a lot of my clients, especially those that are just getting started as SaaS platforms, are using something like Pendo to evaluate the product usage and click paths and all of that. And so I am very curious. Maybe we'll do an unboxing of a Pendo and HubSpot integration to see what that really looks like, because there's so much value in that.
Yeah.
Potentially. Depends what the
Yeah.
really looks like.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Like, I think you mentioned single source of truth. I try to help people think about it from the whole the system is the single source of truth, and like customer facing people hopefully are working on a HubSpot, and then non-customer facing people have their systems. Because that's where, like, really thinking through, and this is a workspace issue. That's generally the reason you're bringing in data from other systems, is to help somebody action off of it or to automate, engagement activity or response to engagement activity, things like that. Almost always like customer journey, related. So are we asking the question of like, okay, do we need to do anything with this data? Because in understanding that the integration partner, whether it's a custom integration, a private app, or somebody on the app marketplace, like they have a specific set of objectives, let's say, and that's why it's different. But like if somebody's building for the HubSpot platform, it's much different than somebody who isn't. The HubSpot certified app doesn't necessarily mean that. And just ask, so they're going to Yeah. Plus, they can't now. They're not going to do full audits of your system probably, so they can't know the things that you know. And the question that you could ask is, what else do I need to do with this, right? And if you don't ask that, the the default is going to be, and this is where you could just draw this line without even asking this question. It's like my customer team is in HubSpot and they're not logging into any other systems, right? Because so often in those situations where we just bring data over, it's like there's a button to open up, the Lightbox or iframe or whatever to now you're in the other system, or it links you over to the other system. And those providers obviously don't mind if you have to do that, because now they have control over their UX.
Now they have their last login date.
Right, exactly. But that's where, like, I just remember this experience where it's like, oh, somebody showed up with like a 13-inch laptop and the little CPQ window is like this big, and they're constantly having to scroll. And it's just like, okay, can we think through what's happening here with the integration? It's not just about bringing data over, but how are we integrating it into, the team's process?
Yeah, I think when you start to evaluate an integration, which you should, and I know it can be hard to slow down as a, former startup software marketer, slowing down is not really part of my experience. But it's valuable to slow down and think about, like, what do you want out of this integration? When you go looking in the marketplace or you go looking for a solution to integrate one platform with another, I think figuring out that user story of, like, why is this helpful? What am I trying to get? Should be documented well before you even start looking at solutions. And then really testing it. And it's tough because I think the HubSpot marketplace, the pages are very informative and the reviews are very informative. But I think until you install that integration yourself, it's really difficult to test, like, what is getting mapped over. And they'll show you, like, these records are sharing information. This is the flow. But you just get that one little table kind of down in the middle of the page that tells you, like, contacts are connected. And it's like, okay, what does that even mean? Like, is it creating contacts? Is it posting to properties? Like, what is happening? And so when you think about something like, even to use a call and texting platform as an example, um, you know, I've seen examples where platforms they'll create a custom object and post to that custom object. I've seen examples where they're posting to a set of properties. They create a new property group and create like 15 properties and they post to that. And then you've seen examples where they are much better integrated, for lack of a better term, and they're actually posting to the various places where you would want it to. And in Kixie, I think they showed this in their demo, you can really move between the two systems pretty seamlessly. So you can, like, see the record in HubSpot. They had links to open it up from Kixie. They have that sort of little sidebar thing that you can keep on your desktop. That's pretty handy. And then I believe from their demo with you, it posts to, like, a call activity.
Yes.
It's not posting to a property, which is exactly what you would want. When you look at, the use case that you should have started before you installed Kixie, you should have gone in and said, okay, my marketing team and my sales team want to see how many calls are being made in each life cycle stage. They want to see, how many it takes to close a deal. They want to see how often these calls are happening. They want to be able to see the date of the last call. And maybe you compare that against the email cadence that is being done out of HubSpot. And when you want to compare those two things together, they have to be the same thing. Like, to be able to report on them, they both have to be in the engagements API. That's how they organize it there. They have to, like, be posted as those things, which you can see in lists, you can see in reports, and that's how they sort of reference them and break them down. And then there's the engagement type of calls, emails, meetings recorded, and I think maybe text messages are in there. I think SMS gets thrown in too. But to know that platform, the Kixie platform, is pushing things in a way that you can look at those two data types next to each other will, like, greatly improve your reporting experience and the touch points that it'll have across your organization. But you wouldn't even know to look for that unless you're sitting down and saying, this is how I want to be able to use this information. This is where it's lacking. It's not getting recorded this way. And now I'm looking for a solution. And I think you feel some of that pain going into it, but to really sit down and put the time into it and say, my, marketing team wants to see this type of reporting. My sales team wants to operationalize it in this way. Even, CSM engagement, if they're going to use it this way, how do we need to assess that? And then looking for the solution that's really going to deliver on all of the things that you need or close to it.
Yeah. And these activity objects like messages and WhatsApp calls, like all these things, it's you're doing work already to like bring it over to HubSpot. Just put it over here instead of over here. And now the user is going to get a ton more value. Your integration is so much better because now you can build more value, and you could even go the length of like creating like dashboards that are related to your specific, integration. So it's really a powerful thing when you try to use, the HubSpot. And this is where like the lack of knowledge related to HubSpot is the hindrance here, and that people just don't know how powerful it can be. So if you don't think it can do these things, then you're not going to look for like a place to put that data, right? You're just going to say, okay, everybody, and this is where there's so many, like whether you're a developer or a user, it's not a good, it's no excuse right now to say, oh, everybody else is doing it this way, or it's always been done this way. Like so many of those things are just going away right now. So definitely understanding your process and asking questions specific to your process, because the NetSuite integration is a great example where it's a HubSpot like built app, and it looks like it does all the new things, like it's using orders and all this stuff. But you look at the ratings and reviews, and people say in the market, like anybody who knows what they're doing with the NetSuite integration with HubSpot will not use that app.
Heard that.
Right? And how many times have we heard that about an app? So it's a challenge right now, and that's where, as plug and play as HubSpot can make things for you, you just got to take a second to understand what's about to happen.
The way they make it look plug and play in some cases. But I think that's the real takeaway here today is like, sit down and just dream it out. Like, what would you be able to do if you had your ideal processes in HubSpot? And it may feel crazy. You're like, yeah, I want my CSMs to only log in HubSpot and that's all that their machine runs all day. Like, great, let's figure out how to do that. Let's pull in everything that they need. Let's map through what HubSpot can do. Let's find solutions for what HubSpot can't do. And you can actually get pretty close to that ideal. But you have to sit down and realize that might be possible and then start to map out what that would look like. And so like, don't hold anything back when you start to think about this process. And even if you come to the conclusion of like, oh, we need a private app or we need development resources, like, don't be scared. It's really not that hard. And I would like to say that there are lots of no-code options out there, and there are, and I've played with some of them, but I still think you're limited with that. And some dev resources can be helpful. So the sort of like good, better, best of, or least custom to most custom. Least custom is like right out of the HubSpot marketplace. You hit install and everything works. Feel like that it's like a 50-50 shot at that happening, like actually getting what you want. And the times that I win with that is when I go in knowing what it is, or you sort of settle for something. I do remember, I think they fixed it now, but a couple of years ago when I worked in-house for a company that was using Outreach, the Outreach and HubSpot integration was such that you couldn't pull contact owners from Outreach. And I don't think Outreach was creating contacts in HubSpot. It was like they would push the email records back in, but it wasn't what we wanted to. And so we had to set an internal process that the target list that they were using and reaching out to in Outreach, when they uploaded it to Outreach, they also had to upload it in HubSpot so that they could take ownership and we could trace that downstream. I'm pretty sure they fixed that pretty quickly after I complained about it. So I assume it's better, but I haven't actually used it in another live portal yet, so I don't know. But that's another example of like, okay, it got us like 75% of the way there. We got all of the engagements reported, which was great, but we still had to do these other things to make sure it worked for our organization. And so if you go into it knowing that's what you're getting, and you've got, some process guidance to go with that integration that you're installing, then your expectations are like, you're not missing out on anything, which is great. And so it helps to sort of talk to the community as you're looking for solutions. And then sort of the middle piece is, all right, we get some of this through integrations, we get some of this through Zapier or Make or whatever, to help you sort of push through, and you don't necessarily need dev resources, but you still might be limited in what you can access. I know with HubSpot, as you're working through some of those, reaching across objects or referencing multiple objects can be tricky with that. So if you're trying to get like contacts that have a company that meets whatever criteria, you might run into some roadblocks there. And so then the third and highest level of that is like a custom app. And it sounds scary, but I've now done it. Me, the marketing business major, has figured out how to make some of these custom apps with JavaScript and AppScript. So like, it's really not that scary and probably won't cost as much as you think it might. So it's worth it.
Yeah. And there's a growing volume. I feel like at how much of a requirement Ops Hub is starting to be to really get the value out of HubSpot. And I'm pretty sure I'm in agreement. And as that grows, there's going to be a lot of standardized ways. So standardized ways coming out of this you might not get to no code, but there's going to be like libraries, which they've started building. But all of this is like, it moves so fast. Like any kind of reference material that gets published can get out of date, very quickly. So they're definitely making it challenging. But that's where, if you know the building blocks, like, and understand how HubSpot's put together, that's why I always try to pull people in, like sales and like the people that think they don't need to know how HubSpot works.
Yeah.
It's like, if we can just usually get there at some point related to the tasks that they're doing, but it's like, no, if you put this here, now we can create lists, and then we can create workflows, and then we can send the emails that you're sending every day, out automatically without you sending them. How powerful would that be? Right? So like these building blocks, and you can start there. Then it doesn't really matter how fast the platform moves, right? You have data, you have objects, you have all these tools, right? You start from that place, understand your process. Again, please just like with everything, just understand your process before you start building and plugging stuff in. No matter how easy somebody tells you it's going to be, just understand your process. And if that's a challenge for you, and I say that phrase, understand your process, two questions I love to ask are, one, because I'm such an advocate of client-facing portals, and if you have that data in HubSpot, can easily show it on a web page. Does the customer ever need to see this piece of data, right? It could be in an email, or maybe you're telling them over the phone. Like if the answer is yes, get it into HubSpot. Life just gets way easier. Even if it's not a portal, now we can send it via automatic emails and stuff like that. But also, who else needs to see the data internally, right? And why do they need to see it? Starting to ask, like you mentioned, the user stories across all the customer-facing teams, and sometimes, more back office teams like financial teams and things like that, like making it easier for them to see, even if they're used to working in the other system, if they see that data inside of HubSpot and it doesn't, like, it's not formatted the same, or it's called something else, or it's just all these things lead to, challenges of adoption and really the value all the teams are getting. So you got to talk to people who are using the system and make sure you understand what they need.
Yeah, definitely. That like internal stakeholder checkpoint is really essential.
Yeah, because it's their workspace. After all, that's what we want it to be.
Workspace to suit their needs, and everybody gets what they want all in one place. And then you almost have a single source of truth.
Indeed. Well, I'm glad you brought this topic up. I think it's an important one right now as you hear all this extensibility and customizability, and the app marketplace is exploding. And like at the end of the day, you need like 80 installs or something like that to be like HubSpot certified app, which there's 200,000 customers. It's not that many. Uh,
Yeah.
so just you got to do some diligence here in making sure this works for you. Uh, and there's lots of people, like Danielle that can help you at least think through that. That's the hard part here. Like building stuff in HubSpot, lots of resources available to do that, but the strategy of how everything needs to come together, you should try to get help there because there's always different points of view to be at least explored, right? All the way down to like, should I build the property on this object or on this object, right?
Nice.
Uh, Very basic place to start. We definitely don't need all the properties on all the objects. And I'll just leave it there. So until next week, think about, it'd be cool if we had access to the uh, sales workspace
Yeah,
next
we're gonna
week.
let this one go. I really,
Yeah,
really want that sales workspace. Somebody,
yeah.
please.
Maybe we can ping some people. But either way, as your team is working in HubSpot, and you're thinking about new integrations or challenges with current integrations, find some opportunities and let's grow. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.